Hi everyone, and welcome to Horror Spectator. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We explore the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories. If you're a returning viewer, glad to have you back, friend. Your support truly means the world. The Appalachian Mountains are wrapped in mystery, shaped by centuries of folklore and unspoken rules. Those who live here, or dare to hike and camp in these woods, know that some rules aren't just superstition. In this video, we're diving into 3 chilling stories of people who broke one of the most infamous rules of all. If you find yourself deep in the Appalachians, there's one thing you should never do, under any circumstances. Whistle, especially at night. These stories will show you exactly why. Remember, viewer discretion is advised. In 2015, I decided to do something that still feels surreal to this day. For some context, I had just ended a 14-year relationship, and my head wasn't in the right place when I decided to go hiking in the Appalachian Mountains in Vermont. One of my best friends was an experienced hiker, and in my naive city-dweller mindset, I figured that I too could do it, despite having zero experience. I know how ridiculous that sounds, but it happened. I think all of us, or at least most of us, have done some really stupid things after a breakup. Probably not as stupid as mine, but still pretty dumb. Spring had just begun, and the temperatures were nice, even in the evenings and at night. So, during the first few days of hiking, I felt comfortable. There were plenty of people on the trails, which made me feel safe, and they were genuinely friendly, always sharing things with one another. I started to feel genuinely good, and with each step I took, I felt more confident in my decision. But the problem with feeling confident without actually knowing what you're doing is that things can turn dangerous very quickly. On one of the trails, I started hearing the sound of running water in the distance. This particular trail had far fewer people, and throughout the day, I had only come across one couple. Afraid I might run out of water, I decided to follow the sound and veered slightly off the path. However, as I kept walking, the sound remained constant, and before I knew it, I was much farther from the trail than I had intended. I kept going, convinced I was close. And finally, I found it. A small stream. So small, in fact, that I had no idea how I'd heard it from the trail. Now that I was right next to it, the sound didn't seem much louder than before. Regardless, I filled up my bottle and stood there for a few moments, taking in the scenery. My plan for this trip was to stay at designated camping areas, or preferably in shelters. But standing there in that beautiful spot, with the sun setting, I figured it wouldn't hurt to set up camp for the night. So, I did. After pitching my tent, I took a short walk around the area to familiarize myself with it before settling in and preparing my dinner. Everything was peaceful. The nighttime sounds of the forest had settled in, and the babbling stream provided a serene, almost meditative atmosphere. Then, around 10 p.m., I saw something between the trees. My first instinct was sheer terror. I thought it was a wild animal. But then I got a better look and realized it looked like a dog. I want to pause the story here to clarify that, in truth, I don't know if what I saw was a dog, but at the time, I was convinced it was. I called out to it and tried to lure it with food. But as soon as I moved closer, it ran off. I figured it might be a dog that had gotten separated from one of the hikers. It wasn't uncommon to see dogs off-leash on the trails, so I did something I had no idea was a bad idea in the Appalachians at night. I whistled, trying to call it over. I stood there, staring into the darkness of the trees, trying to spot the dog again. But as the minutes passed, a chill crept up my spine. It felt like, all of a sudden, The sounds of the forest had disappeared. And then, in the distance, I heard a whistleback. The hairs on my arms stood on end. My heart started pounding. That was not a human whistle, but it was a whistle. It was as if the forest itself was whistling back at me. I rushed back into my tent, zipped it up, and sat inside, listening for any noise. For 2 hours, there was nothing. Just an agonizing silence. I started convincing myself that I had imagined it all, that I simply wasn't used to this kind of environment. I had spent my entire life in the city, and maybe the stillness of the forest was messing with my mind. Then, around midnight, I heard it again. This time I could swear it was louder, closer. I was about to unzip the small window of my tent to take a peek outside when, out of nowhere, I heard movement. It sounded like footsteps, but at the same time, not quite human footsteps. The sound got closer to my tent. I covered my mouth, trying to stifle any noise I might accidentally make. It was too dark outside. But even so, the moon provided just enough light to make out a shadow approaching, circling my tent. As calmly as I could, I reached out and grabbed the knife I had brought with me. Whatever this was, it had to be huge to make that kind of noise. I told myself it was a bear. I had bear spray with me, but I knew it wasn't foolproof. I started feeling lightheaded from the sheer panic when, suddenly, a hand pressed against my tent. I can't even describe what it was. I just know it wasn't a bear's paw. It was huge, but the fingers were disturbingly thin, almost skeletal. A truly terrifying sight. I don't know how long I sat there, on the verge of a heart attack, with that hand pressed against my tent, completely motionless. One hand over my mouth, the other gripping my knife to my chest. And then, in the distance, I heard the whistle again. And just like that, it was over. The hand pulled away. I heard movement retreating into the woods. Fueled by adrenaline, I unzipped the small tent window and peeked outside. But there was nothing. The forest was as calm as it had been hours before. Completely silent, except for the sound of the water. I spent the rest of the night terrified, waiting for daylight. And as soon as the sky started to lighten, I got up, packed my things, and made my way back to the trail as fast as I could. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know what I saw. All I know is that if I tell this story to people around me, they'll think I made it all up, or that I lost my mind. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And it was enough to make me never want to leave the city again. My wife and I had just moved into a small cabin in the Appalachian Mountains in Maine. It was our first week there, and for the first few days, there was a lot of work to do. From assembling furniture to fixing plumbing, a seemingly endless list of small tasks demanded our full attention. I believe that for the first 2 days, we didn't hear anything strange at all. We were both so exhausted from unpacking and settling in that, as soon as we lay down, we fell into a deep sleep. However, on the third night, after finally finishing the bathroom renovations, it was close to 11 p.m. when we wrapped up and went to the kitchen to make dinner. My wife was taking a shower while I was preparing a simple pasta dish with vegetables. Nothing too elaborate, as the fatigue still weighed heavily on us. As I placed the pasta into the pot, I heard a sharp, high-pitched whistle. Something strange and unsettling. At first, I thought it was just a sound coming from the house. Maybe the plumbing or the exhaust fan. But as quickly as it started, it faded away, leaving me with the eerie feeling that something had just slipped past my awareness. I couldn't pinpoint where it had come from, and although the sound stuck in my mind, I eventually forgot about it and didn't even mention it to my wife that night. The fact that we were now living in the Appalachians only added to the mystery and beauty of our surroundings. When you move to a place like this, it's impossible not to hear stories, legends, and old myths. My wife, especially, loved that kind of folklore, but to us, it was just entertainment, nothing more than a way to pass the evenings with fantastic and spooky conversations. Neither of us really believed in the stories we had heard. The next day, with less work to do and more free time, we finally finished unpacking in the morning, and the day was peaceful, and in a way, we were genuinely happy to be there, together, living out the decision to buy that secluded cabin. The overwhelming sense of peace surrounding us felt like a good omen. But that night, as we were getting ready for bed, I heard the whistle again. This time, there was no doubt. It was the same eerie sound from the night before. My wife immediately sat up, and we looked at each other, confused. We had no idea what it could be. I got up, determined to figure out where it was coming from. I searched around the house, but nothing seemed to explain that unsettling whistling. That's when my wife, with a frightened expression, pointed to the window and said the sound was coming from the woods. We both stood there, unsure of what to do, the uncertainty hanging over us. Our nearest neighbors were miles away. The sound had a human-like quality, yet it wasn't exactly human. The next day, we debated what it could have been, trying to come up with a rational explanation. We had heard the legends, but we reassured ourselves that it was probably just an animal, maybe a bird that made a sound like that. That same night, more out of impulse than bravery, I decided to try whistling back, just to see if I would get a response. When nothing happened, the forest suddenly went silent. We both laughed, saying it was probably just an animal, just as startled by the noise as we were. However, later that night, around 4 a.m., I woke up again to the whistle. This time the sound was much closer. I turned over, expecting to find my wife awake, but to my surprise, she wasn't in bed. I called her name, but there was no response. I went downstairs, thinking she might be in the kitchen, but she wasn't there. Then, hearing a noise from the front of the cabin, I looked out the window and saw something strange among the trees. My heart started pounding. For a moment, I thought it was my wife. But if it was her, what was she doing outside at this hour? I squinted into the darkness between the trees, but I couldn't see anything clearly. Just a growing sense of dread. Opening the front door, I stepped outside, calling her name. At that moment, a strong gust of wind blew through the bedroom window, making the door slam shut behind me. I had left the window open. The sudden, unexpected sound sent chills down my spine. I knew the wind had caused it, but now I was locked outside, and my wife was somewhere in the trees, doing God knows what. I called out to her again, and that's when I heard her voice. It wasn't coming from the trees. It was coming from the back of the house, from the porch that led to the sunroom. I froze. Then, instinctively, I looked back toward the trees, and what I saw made my blood run cold. I'm not entirely sure. I think fear dulled my senses, but I swear, I saw eyes. A pair of glowing eyes in the darkness. Panicked, I bolted toward the back of the house. The moment I saw my wife, I yelled for her to get inside immediately. She didn't hesitate. She ran into the house and held the door open, waiting for me to rush inside so she could lock it behind me. It took me several minutes to catch my breath. my mind racing. When I finally asked her, nearly breathless, what she was doing out on the porch at that hour, the only thing she said was that she didn't remember. She had no memory of how she got there. She had never sleepwalked before. We spent the rest of the night watching the tree line, waiting for any sign that something, or someone, was out there. But as dawn broke, we saw nothing. It's been 5 months since that night, and while we still hear the whistle on some nights, I've never dared to whistle back again, nor do we ever step outside after dark. We tell ourselves it was just an animal, something that scared us for no reason, and that nothing else will happen. But I spoke to our nearest neighbors, about 3 miles away, and what the man told me still unsettles me to this day. He said there was a reason we got the cabin for such a low price. When he saw the concern on my face, he just told me not to worry, just never go outside at night. That anyone who lives in the Appalachians knows at least 2 things. Never go out after dark, and never whistle at night. All my life, I have lived in the Appalachians. Not only my immediate family, but also my parents' siblings and their families live here. We are a big, close-knit family, proud to be children of these mountains. The memories of days spent in these lands are ingrained in me, as if they are part of my very existence. Every tree, every stream, and every whisper of the wind through the leaves carries stories that have been passed down for generations. However, there is one story that stands out from all the others. One that is never told easily, and that always brings a heavy silence whenever someone dares to mention it. Mostly because it's not just a story we heard. It's a story we lived. It happened over 25 years ago when I was about 11. As was tradition, our family would go camping whenever possible. We almost always picked the same spot, a creek not far from my paternal grandparents' house. A familiar place where we felt safe. But that year, we decided to venture a little farther away from our usual spots. The forest was denser, and the sounds of nature were more intense. We had hiked in the area before, but we had never spent the night there. That night, only a few of us were on the trip. Me, my younger sister, my parents, my older cousin, and my mom's brother and his wife. I have always cherished my memories of nights spent in the Appalachians. But this particular night turned into a nightmare that forever changed how we viewed these family gatherings. What should have been a typical night by the fire, telling stories and sharing laughter, became a disturbing memory that to this day, no one likes to talk about. I remember that as usual, after dinner, we were all sitting around the campfire. The fire cast moving shadows on the nearby trees. My uncle was talking about mountain folklore, just like he did on almost every camping trip. He's a natural storyteller. I remember fondly how he tried to soften the stories so they wouldn't scare us too much, but I was always a kid with a vivid imagination. Even before I heard the full words, I could already picture hidden creatures in the shadows and whispers coming from the darkness outside the fire's light. My cousin, 16 at the time, took cruel pleasure in scaring me. Whenever he could, he would make up even scarier stories or find ways to startle me, laughing when he saw me frozen in fear. That night, as my uncle spoke of forbidden things in the mountains, one warning stood out above all the others. Never whistle at night. The reasons varied depending on the story. Some said whistling called wandering spirits. Others spoke of creatures that mimicked human sounds to lure their prey. But there was one common thread in all these tales. Those who whistled attracted something. The idea terrified me, and of course, my cousin picked up on that right away. When we stepped away from the fire to relieve ourselves, he took the opportunity. Without hesitation, he put his fingers to his lips and whistled. A sharp, piercing sound that seemed to cut through the forest like a blade. Instantly, I shivered, and an irrational fear gripped me. The silence that followed was deafening, as if even the insects and birds had stopped to listen. My heart pounded, and without thinking twice, I ran back to the others, yelling that he had whistled. My dad and my uncle were already scanning the trees when I burst into the clearing. Their faces changed immediately. They tried to stay calm, telling us there was nothing to worry about, that these were just old stories, but something in their eyes told me they weren't so sure. My aunt quickly reprimanded my cousin, saying that not only was it wrong to scare me like that, but that he should have more respect for the stories and the mountains. But what was done could not be undone. The mood shifted completely. The easygoing atmosphere we had before evaporated, replaced by a lingering tension. The night went on, but the fire seemed to cast less warmth, and the darkness of the forest felt heavier. Eventually, everyone retired to their tents, but the feeling that something was wrong stayed with me. There were 3 tents. One for my parents, one for me and my sister, and a slightly larger one for my uncle, aunt, and cousin. I was restless in the tent, but I was just a kid, and after a long day of hiking and playing, exhaustion won over. Sleep came quickly. I was jolted awake in the middle of the night by my sister's quiet sobs. She was trembling beside me, whispering my name. Before I could ask her what was wrong, I realized something was off. The sounds of the night felt wrong. No crickets, no rustling leaves, nothing but our own heavy breathing. And then I heard the footsteps. Slow, dragging steps, crunching dry leaves just a few feet from our tent. Fear turned my blood to ice, and for a moment, I wished I could shrink until I disappeared. My sister murmured something, her voice barely above a whisper. Holding my breath, I forced myself to be brave, motioning for her to stay silent. She had always listened to me and trusted me, so she huddled close and stayed quiet. The minutes passed and I hadn't heard more footsteps, so slowly I unzipped a tiny slit in the tent, just enough to peek outside. And that's when I saw them. 2 pairs of red eyes, glowing in the darkness like burning embers, staring right at us. They weren't reflections of light. There wasn't enough light to reflect. These eyes had their own glow. My blood ran cold. I don't know if I tried to scream or if fear paralyzed me, but something made me jerk back and fall. My sister started crying, and suddenly, there was movement outside. The adults were awake. Rushed footsteps, hushed voices, the hurried unzipping of tent flaps. My aunt was the first to reach us. Her face was pale, eyes wide. She said we needed to leave. There was no hesitation. My sister clung to her, and the 3 of us hurried out. My uncle was in my parents' tent, saying something in a low voice. Everyone was already awake and ready to go. The adults grabbed only the essentials, and we abandoned the tents, walking swiftly toward the cars without ever looking back. My dad and uncle were whispering, but I caught fragments. My uncle kept insisting that something had been watching me from the trees, while my dad seemed more concerned with getting a detailed description of what, exactly, I had seen. He hadn't seen or heard anything. Neither had my mom. In the car, my cousin didn't say a word. He was paler than I had ever seen him. When I finally looked at him, I saw his eyes were filled with tears. After a few minutes, his voice shaking, he muttered that he had seen the eyes too, that he wasn't messing with me. He didn't know that I had seen them as well. I had kept silent, still in shock. I only told him later that I had seen them too. The next day, my dad and my 3 uncles went back to the campsite to retrieve what we had left behind. They never said if they found anything unusual, but from that day on, we rarely spoke about it. We never went back to that spot, and more importantly, we never spent another night in the Appalachians.